Welcome to the Uncommonality Podcast. I'm Keon, here with my co-host Sal, to bring you into a community of extraordinary entrepreneurs and innovators. We dive deep into the journeys that have defined them, from hard-earned insights to the hurdles that make each success story real. Today, we're joined by Juan Garzón, Executive Director of Innovate Charlotte and a key driver of Charlotte's entrepreneurial ecosystem. With nearly 2 decades of experience across industries, Juan has built startups, supported over 500 founders through PitchBreakfast, and developed a pitch methodology widely recognized in the community. At Innovate Charlotte, he connects innovation-led entrepreneurs to resources, mentorship, and capital, fostering a thriving ecosystem for high-growth startups to flourish. Listen, share, and we're happy to have you be a part of the journey. Thanks. All right, welcome back, everybody. I'm Keon Alberto with my co-host here, Sal Perez, and welcome to the Uncommonality Podcast, episode 5, here with Juan Garzón. We're very, very grateful to have you here, Juan. You're a very impressive person with a massive imprint in the Charlotte community. And so for us to be able to learn from you today and be able to have these conversations and share it with our community as well, I think it'll be very valuable for everybody involved. And just to start off, just want to say thank you for the time. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to dive into this as we're still new to this. There's a lot of a learning process that we're going through. But I think there's been some very good traction, and I think that this conversation in itself will be very, very useful in terms of continuing to grow our rapport and our identity and what it is we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And, when we look at your career over the whole, it's had kind of what we talked about on the Kuth episode with Courtney Bensinger, the zigzag route, right? You started off in one space, then took a pivot, life hit you with certain circumstances, took another pivot, and you found yourself in kind of what I would say building up the structural space for entrepreneurship with Innovate Charlotte. So maybe for some context for the viewers, can you give us a little bit of background about yourself as a person and kind of what led you to Innovate Charlotte?
Yeah, sure. In terms of quick background, I'm been here in Charlotte for about 28 years now. Originally from upstate New York. Child of immigrants, first generation college student, and really found my passion supporting entrepreneurship and everything around entrepreneurship. What else? I have 4 kids and a dog, so that keeps me busy outside of all the work stuff that we'll get into. And I love Charlotte. I absolutely love Charlotte. A big part of what I do. I mean, I love entrepreneurship, but I really love Charlotte.
Yeah, I think that right there is actually a very important point. It's the fact that you love Charlotte and the things that you're doing is trying to impact the community of Charlotte. And that's like at the center of everything we try to tell people is do what you want to do and try to figure out what it is that you love, because that's going to be the inspiration to motivate you endlessly to continue doing that work.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so like just personally from us, we see that completely. You wanting to build out a Charlotte community, help out entrepreneurs and build the ecosystem that we have here that's relatively new, since you're pretty much, I like to say, the father of the entrepreneurship community in Charlotte. But something else I want to know is interesting. Like, yeah, I think all 3 of us are the children of immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this could be a very powerful podcast for, I guess, the minority community involved. And, there's opportunity in this country for everybody that really wants to chase it and I think has the ambition to go after it. So yeah, I mean, let's definitely dive into this, Juan. Love that you're here. And let's just kind of go through the story of what it is that you were doing. So I'll kind of let Sal start with the questions in terms of, starting out where you started and that journey of getting you through that zigzag route all the way to where you are now with Innovate Charlotte and PitchBreakfast.
Yeah, so can you give us some background? I know you start off in the mortgage space, but maybe for the viewers, if you can talk a little bit about how you started your career, where the first pivot took place, and give some context into how we found ourselves, A, connecting with each other, but B, specifically, we want to know how is it that starting off in the mortgage space, going through the financial crisis, and then finding your foothold after that, and everything up until that point? Because I think there's a lot of value to drag out of there, especially like Keon said here.
The pivot was amazing.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think the zigzag conversation is always great. And what's funny is there was a lot of zigzagging even before I got into the entrepreneurial community with MH Loan Finder. But just to start there, I went to go work for a mortgage company And I wasn't there very long, and I already kind of had this feeling of, yeah, this is weird, right? The way they do things. And this is pre-2008. The mortgage industry was very different. So they had me in a phone center calling people and trying to get them to give me their information so I can run, get them pre-qualified for a refinance or something like that. And we had a script that we had to follow. And once you go through this and you start, talking about, hey, we could save you money, we can do this, let's get this information, let me get your social security, let me pull your credit, see what you qualify for. At the end, one of the questions was, is your home a mobile or manufactured home? And if they said, yes, it was, then our response is, I'm sorry, we're not able to help you at this time. And, I'm just like, why don't we ask this up front, save them a lot of time, save a hit on their credit? And they're like, no, this script is written in a specific way. You've got to read it the way it is. And we would print off these applications and put them in a box and said mobile homes. And I kept looking over, and this box, just had a whole bunch of applications. We pulled their credit. And I'm like, well, that makes no sense whatsoever. Like, what if someone has a mobile home? Where do they go? And at the time, LendingTree, this is 2004. So LendingTree was, making a big deal about, come apply one time and like get, lots of different rates. And I said, well, LendingTree doesn't do mobile homes. So if you've got a mobile home, where do you go to like compare rates? And apparently there wasn't anything, that I could find at the time. And I'm like, well, what if there was? And so, I was at this company 2 months, and I just kind of had that wild hair of like, I'm going to go do something better. And I left and started my own mortgage company called MH Loan Finder. And we worked with the 2 largest mobile home forums at the time. So forums were a bigger deal back then.
Yeah.
And so it was the 2 largest ones, and created a little application right in the sidebar where anybody who was on the forum wanted to talk about their mobile home could get a quick quote for a refinance or a purchase. And then we partnered with lenders all over the country. I had over 200 different programs from different lenders. And yeah, did all that. And then in 2005, I went back to school, Johnson & Wales, and was running the business in the evening. So a lot of the work that I was doing directly was in California because of the time difference. So I would go to class in the day, and then at night kind of go work all of the West Coast deals. We would have leads coming in that we would sell to other mortgage companies. We would have some that we would close directly. We did both mobile homes with land and without land, which are technically 2 different kinds of loans.
Mm-hmm.
What we called it chattel loan. And even started a side business selling access to all of these lending programs to other mortgage brokers. Was kind of a separate service. And I was doing all of this while I was in school, and I didn't know how to build this stuff out. So I looked online and found Odesk, which is now Upwork, and found a developer that could help me develop the platform where the applications went through. I'm just making all this stuff as I went along, right?
That's incredible.
And did that until 2008. And in 2008, 2 things happened. The housing crisis. So a lot of those programs that I had where, I was able to compare rates and all of that, they all just dried up. The whole mortgage industry got transformed. And the second thing that happened is I graduated, and so I said, all right, well, I've got my degree, I had a good college experience. I was able to work building MH Loan Finder while going full in on the university experience. So I was actually Johnson & Wales' first student body president here. And,
oh, nice. Congrats.
Yeah. And then I got tapped for an organization called DECA. You guys ever heard of DECA?
No, what is that?
It's like a national marketing organization. And they wanted to start a chapter. And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And then they said, hey, would you be interested in running for national office? And I was like, yeah, sure. So
yeah, why not?
So then I got elected to national office for DECA and got to travel to different states, helping them with their DECA organizations and do the national conference in Texas and Orlando. And I see that entrepreneurial piece enabling that, right? What I did with MH Loan Finder allowed me to go full bore into the university experience, get a lot of value, make a lot of connections there. And then, in 2008, it's like, okay, well, that was that.
That was great experience.
Yeah, it was a great experience. I didn't know what else I could do with it because, the programs all dried up. And so I said, all right, well, it's time to go get a job. And I did that. In hindsight, afterwards, and I can get to that part later, but there's this whole world of mentorship and accelerators and incubation and venture capital. I knew nothing about that. There was no community. There was no, even the language was different, right? And nobody used the term startup that I knew of in Charlotte, in 2004. That was a California thing. In fact, just to date myself here, just to kind of give you what the era was like. When I started in 2005, I started going to Johnson & Wales. I said, I've got an idea for another platform. It is going to be something that connects university students. It was originally for the different Johnson & Wales campuses, and you could switch from campus to campus, and you could join groups by what classes you were taking, and have profiles. And it was going to look like a yearbook.
Facebook.
Yeah. So
Facebook.
I went to, so it was called JWU Connect, or My JWU. I still have the domain and the branding and all of that. And I started to do some customer discovery when I started at Johnson & Wales. And I started showing some students, like, look at this, you could connect with friends and all of that. Now, Johnson & Wales has a campus in Rhode Island. That's where the principal campus is. So we had some people from Northeast, and they're like, yeah, they're doing this at Harvard. It's called Facebook. And this was when they were just in the Ivy Leagues, and I had no idea, and I was like, so bummed. But yeah, that's how far back in the startup, world this was. And so I did that. Graduated, went to go work for a healthcare market research firm, and the exciting part about that was it was international. So one of the questions they asked in my interview was, do you have a passport? Right? So I'm like,
sweet.
Yeah. All right, here we go. And yeah, I got to essentially build their marketing from scratch, build their brand. They had no marketing really. We were able to grow that company from, I think it was like 14 million to 100 million in about 4 years. Built a marketing team, really revitalized, built the brand. And I had a lot of fun with that. But once we got to that 100 million, the company got acquired by another company. There was this whole merger, and part of that was a whole marketing team that was in the space for a long while. So suddenly the only way I was going to keep my job is if I flew to New York City every week. And I had just started growing my family then. We have this one story where my oldest, Anna Sophia, I was packing up to go to London, and she climbs into my suitcase because she wanted to come with me. So the idea of like traveling like that for work, not that appealing. So I took a package and left, and that's when I really started to get involved in the Charlotte business community. Because after, that whole industry, even though we had a Charlotte office, I wasn't talking to Charlotte business. I knew, nothing about the Charlotte business community. So when I left and I started consulting, I started taking that marketing experience, brand building experience, what I learned with MH Loan Finder, I started working with small businesses. That's when I discovered this idea of an entrepreneurial ecosystem. And if I could share another funny story with that, when I was at school, I also did an internship at Bank of America and was introduced to Dan Roselli, who used to work at the bank. And he said, hey, I'm about to launch this thing called Packard Place, and explain what it is. And he's like, you should check it out. We're going to have a grand opening. And if anybody in Charlotte knows, on South Tryon or South Boulevard, there's a building that says Packard on the side. And so he's giving me the address, and I was like, oh yeah, I know where it is. And so the day of the grand opening of Packard Place shows up, and I drive to the Packard building, and it's empty. There's nobody there because that's not Packard Place. And I was like, I might have gotten the date wrong. And so I went home. And so I missed the grand opening of Packard Place because I assumed that the building that said Packard on it was what he was referring to. And it wasn't. It was the one uptown.
What'd you learn?
Yeah. So double check your address.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't assume but we connected later, and I started to do workshops and consulting and helping with the very first cohort of that accelerator. And that's how I got into the ecosystem building space.
Yeah. So before we continue to dive into the ecosystem space and move on to part 2 of that journey, I think there's a lot to unpack in what it is that you have said so far. And for me personally, I'm sure you have resonated in other ways. The first thing that I noticed was ask questions. The first thing you did to start this entire journey was ask questions.
Yep.
You were at your job that you were working there, and you started to see some issues and problems yourself, and you decided to ask the questions to start developing what it was to create your own ideas to go and develop whatever that is. I resonate with that very strongly because I myself started my company by asking questions, right? So when I was at JP Morgan, I was working with my financial clients, and they would come in, I would manage their wealth management, things like that, right? I would understand their finances, but they would always have their strollers with them in the meetings, and it would get disrupted sometimes because babies cry, they need to be fed, et cetera, et cetera. And so for me, it was like, okay, too many of you guys are coming in like this. Why is this happening? I know you can afford childcare. What's going on? And that simple question just started everything. And it just opened up like Pandora's box. Okay, well, there's a massive issue in America when it comes to childcare. All right, well, how do I potentially solve that? Let me go ask some more questions. Well, there's a massive problem in nursing in America. They're caretakers. Okay, this makes a little more sense. Let me ask some more questions. How are they feeling in their space in terms of nursing? How does that look? What do parents really need? And so like that was the first thing that struck me was, okay, you started asking questions, and that was the first key that I noticed is like, actually, okay, founder key number 5. Always ask questions. I think if you want to progress and move anywhere in your life or start developing some things, start to ask questions that are going to be very thought-provoking to get you thinking in other ways to try to develop something of your own. And so for me, that's almost inspiring because that's really cool.
I think what you just said there, right? Asking the questions that are thought-provoking, you can almost sort of say asking the right questions.
Yes.
And that's a skill. To be honest, it's a skill. So if you're a young entrepreneur, learning to ask the right questions, like learning what are those questions, what are the things that I can ask that will provide me value, maybe provide the person that I'm asking the question to value. That's incredibly important. And I've found that the best entrepreneurs tend to be insanely curious, which means they're asking a lot of questions. And the more you do it, the better your questions become. I think that's just a natural part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think one thing, of all the people I've talked to about starting businesses, entrepreneurship, the funny thing that stood out to me about what you just explained is while you were studying, you picked a time zone that worked for you so you could go full time. I have never heard, like, no one has ever articulated it like that. You said, I'm going full time after work. What a lot of people will do is they'll meet with their clients and everything on this time zone, and they'll just do it later. You took it. I think that's the epitome of working smarter, not harder, right? Not that you weren't working hard, but you were working very smart in that sense too, because you gave yourself an extra 3 hours, made it easier for the clients you were talking to as well. I've never heard it articulated in quite that way, but it got me thinking, I'm like, man, maybe that's the issue for a lot of people. They say, hey, I don't have the time to do this. Maybe it's just, you might just not be working in the right time zone in this time of day. You can really expand your horizons in that sense.
I would even say like the fact that I think this goes into just your track record of obviously you getting to where you've gotten to. It's part of the character, right? So it's like him thinking of something like that and absolutely nobody else would fathom something like that.
Yeah.
It's genuinely thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
And that's a skill that people need to have on top of like asking those curious questions and being curious as a person.
Yeah, I remember that being kind of an intentional decision. First we started to get leads from all across the country, and based on the way mortgages work, you want the highest value. If you've got a double wide in Montana, the value is just not very high. So we would sell those leads to others. But the 3 biggest states were Texas, Florida, and California. And that's, pretty early on when I was making that decision to go to Johnson & Wales. It was if I'm going to do this, it's going to be full bore. And the only way to do it full bore, I felt like, was by going to, during the day. Night school is always an option, but to really get the full value from it, I wanted to go during the day, get involved, mentioned like extracurriculars and all of that, make connections. And that's when California, out of the 3 states, I was like, oh, California is the one that I want to focus on because
Sure.
that made that easy.
I know you're mentioning a lot of things when it comes to, all right, you went back to school to Johnson and Wales, and then that's kind of the thing that jumped and projected you to the next thing through that community that you were able to dive into, which I think makes a lot of sense because you being the forefront of that community and then them asking you to do more and more is kind of setting you up for the Innovate Charlotte, the Pitch Breakfast, et cetera. So I'm kind of putting together the story that you're putting there. But I kind of would love to learn, like, well, what was it before that? Like, what were you doing before Johnson and Wales, and was there anything in that kind of got you to that point or helped in terms of that pivot of this is kind of solidifying what I want to do and this is where I want to go? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah, I said earlier, the zigzagging is always interesting because there's a lot more zigzagging even before then. So to go back even further, I was originally a student at Appalachian State University. So I went there out of high school. I was a poli-sci major on a pre-law track. I thought I was going to be a lawyer. And I even had a poli-sci professor that I talked to who asked, or a legal professor who asked, why do you want to be a lawyer? And I said, oh, I really love law movies. And I do. I love like courtroom dramas and all of that.
Sure.
He's like, most lawyers, that's not what you do. and as we like talked about it and kind of drilled into it, I realized that what I really liked was the communication piece, the persuasive, like selling the jury. And I ended up transitioning over to communications, which is why later on I kind of got into marketing. But what things sort of changed a little bit there for me because while I was at school, that freshman year, I met a girl, which happens, right? And we started dating, and she brought me and a couple friends over to meet her family, and met her dad, and he didn't like me very much. And he told her so, and he said, I don't want you dating him. And we kept dating because we're in college. So anyway, a year later, he finds out that we were dating. So he unenrolls her from all the classes and picks her up and sends her to go live with family out in the Midwest. So this is 1999. This is before free nights and weekends on cell phones.
That's when I was born.
Yeah, I'm really dating myself here. So I was buying calling cards to do long distance calls. And I remember 1 month my bill was $360.
Wow.
This is how much we were just sort of communicating long distance. It's a lot easier now. And we were doing that. We did that for about 9 months. And then we had that conversation of, is this serious or is this not? So at the end of my sophomore year, I flew her down to Charlotte and we went to the courthouse and we got married. And that's my wife today. And so at the time, with everything going on with her family and then issues sort of with my own family, it just made sense to move back to Charlotte. And so I kind of put my college education on pause. We started in Charlotte.
Let me ask you something.
Yeah.
How do you come to, because I'm sure that's relative in terms of the thought process, how do you come to making bigger decisions for yourself? Like, what is, I guess, your system or thought process when it comes to doing those things? I think everybody processes things differently or comes to conclusions differently. It's like when you go to make your big decisions, what does that look like?
I wish I had a really deep, methodology or philosophy at the time. I can't say that I did, but looking back, part of it was just sheer dumb luck of making a smart decision at a time when I was probably not at my wisest. Now in retrospect, I would say, evaluate your priorities, and look at your core values. A big one for me is family. Family is incredibly important to me, and and I know a lot of it's cultural, right?
I was just about to say
it's a for us Latinos, it's a huge important part of that, and I could tell you, and I know we're going in a very different direction here, but when I brought Katie to meet my family in Charlotte for the first time, she absolutely embraced my family. And I've got tons of aunts, uncles, and cousins. I got a large family here in Charlotte. And she embraced them and they embraced her. And that was a huge thing of like, this is not somebody that you let go of.
Yeah.
And so that decision of turning, my college career and really the world and just flipping upside down by dropping out, getting married, moving back to Charlotte was all based on what I thought was best for my family. And it was in the end.
And, on a deeper level in that, I think you knew what you wanted and you were willing to do whatever it took. I know there's going to be some people listening to this, some girls listening to this podcast that are going to say, if he really wanted to, he would. If he really wanted to, he would. If he wanted to get the call cards and pay $360 or whatever it was for the call cards, he would.
You're putting a lot of people on the couch right
Yeah,
now.
100%. I know, some guys are gonna be next to their girlfriends watching this, and they're like, "Oh man, this guy, he's really setting the bar here."
All that happened, but at the same time, I'm like, I don't recommend people, get married at 20 years old. Like I got lucky,
Yeah.
really. But I don't recommend jumping into huge life decisions like that at a super young age. Like take the opportunity to travel, get to know yourself. I gotta add that in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think that there's a method to the madness, though. I want to pick up on the point where you mentioned something about luck.
Yeah.
I have a very interesting take on luck. I think that it's created. It's not a real thing. I think it's something that it's the idea, and I believe that you mentioned this in our first podcast when preparation meets opportunity, and I think that's really what luck is, right? Yeah, things have to fall in place, and sometimes there's an essence of luck in it, but you have to be prepared yourself when that opportunity arises, right? Like you had to be prepared emotionally, available, things like that, and even maturity wise to be able to make the decisions you made to end up in the place that you were.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
while it may have been luck, there's a lot of things on the back end that you're intentionally doing with yourself in terms of your growth and development to be ready when that opportunity presents itself. And that's where the success comes from it rather than a failure from that luck.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of that preparation comes from life experience. And,
Yes.
we don't have to go too much further back, but my parents divorced when I was fairly young. My older sister, kind of moved away. And so I quickly became and I had 3 siblings. So I grew up pretty quickly. I was managing finances and doing taxes for my mom when I was 14 years old.
Yeah.
And in fact, my earliest ventures into entrepreneurship were just because, I don't have an allowance. I don't have money that I could just go to my family for. So you got to come up with it on your own, right? So I started working at 14, selling ice cream at an ice cream cart at a local resort, and then became a ski instructor. And had like 20 some odd jobs before I went to college, like at Johnson & Wales. I mean, a lot of sales. It's what you do when you don't have a lot of experience. You want to learn is you go into sales. I've sold used cars, insurance, home security systems, water filtration systems. These are all the things that you do, and you start to learn a lot about yourself. You learn grit, you learn determination, you learn how to be, you learn about rejection, all of these things. So yeah, there's a lot of those things that come into play just from life experiences, work experiences that later on I can look back and say, oh, that was lucky, but really comes from that, molding that happens from life.
Sure. And maybe on a different lens, you said something in there about culturally, right? When we were talking about the family, that Latin background culturally. And we talked about this with Courtney's episode, but was there something ingrained in you? And, you talk about doing the taxes for your family. You talk about being, quote unquote, on your own for, when everyone moved out. Is there something about you, or is there something about your upbringing or maybe your background that you think extrapolates itself very well into entrepreneurship or into obviously what you have done up until this point? Because obviously the resume speaks for itself. But what I'd really like to kind of take a second to highlight here is, what is it about Juan Garzón that really led you to be able to do that?
Yeah, I think there's 3 things. One, I do think that immigrants are inherently entrepreneurial. usually because of just limited resources. I mean, my grandfather, was always tinkering around, bought a business, like he was always doing so, and I learned a lot from him and always appreciated that. Um, and most immigrants that I know and family members, they've always got side hustles. They've always got, because if you've got limited resources, you're like, all right, how am I gonna make this happen? So immigrants, and this has been shown academically, like immigrants inherently have that entrepreneurial culture. So if you grow up in an immigrant household, you're going to get a little bit of that. I can go further and say that I believe humans are inherently entrepreneurial. I believe entrepreneurship is a natural human state, right? You take a person and they have to kind of make do with what resources they have, and they're going to find a way to do that by selling something, by providing a service. In fact, you can almost say that the corporate mindset of you go to school and you go get a corporate job and you work there for 30 years is not the natural state. That's something that's been developed, in fairly recent history. But throughout history, you start a business, you sell something, you offer a service like that. That's just natural. So part of that is cultural. I think another part of that was upbringing. My dad was a comic book artist. He worked from home.
Really?
That's really cool.
Yeah, that is cool.
Yeah, he worked for Marvel, DC, Disney. He actually drew the original Star Wars comic books.
Are you serious?
Yeah. So if you pull up the original Dark Horse set, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, right on the cover it says Garzón. That was him.
That
You have
is
them?
crazy. Yeah.
Oh my
man.
goodness. I love
That is
Star Wars.
cool.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah. So he did. If you're a Trekkie, he did lots of Star Trek too, but we tend to gravitate more towards his Star Wars work. Yeah, he did several superheroes. He did the Blade Runner series. He did a lot of that stuff. So I grew up with his studio was in our living room, right? So I didn't grow up with a dad who would go to the corporate office and put on a suit and tie. It wasn't like that. So where it's not entrepreneurial in the sense of he owns a business and all of that, it certainly was not the traditional. And so growing up with that, you kind of have a sense of you make your own future. You find your passion and you make your own hours, and you make your own goals, and you make your own future. So I think that was another part of it. And then the third was, just necessity in our own specific situation. I grew up in a pretty small town in upstate New York. We were the only Latino family in there, in that town.
Where'd you grow up?
So it's right on it's in the Catskill Mountains on the Delaware River. It's a tiny town called Callicoon.
I know
Okay.
Callicoon. I went to
No.
Colgate. I know upstate New York very well.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah. If
I know all of them.
If I say Callicoon, it's usually because you're from there.
No, Colgate is not. I know all the little towns up there. It's villages,
Right on
all
the Delaware
of them.
River.
Yeah.
Hamlets. We call them Hamlets.
Yeah, I don't know about Hamlets, but yeah, I know exactly where that is.
Yeah, the towns were too small to be called a town, so it was technically a hamlet. My school in New York was 600 students, K through 12.
Mm.
My sister's graduating class was 19 kids.
Yeah,
Wow.
that makes sense. That
Yeah.
sounds about right.
Yeah, this tiny towns. So you're already, we were the only Latino family there, and especially when my parents got divorced, finances were just like, my mom had never worked before, and all of a sudden when that happened, she's got to go out and get her very first job, and so things got kind of rough there. So you gotta come up with ways to pay for stuff. And so I think that those life experiences, kind of the upbringing, and then some of that immigrant culture, I think all played a factor there.
I would resonate with that. I think for me, just to roll off the culture piece that you were talking about, I think it's very important, because I don't think I would be anywhere I'm at if it wasn't for my parents, and for my parents being immigrants, and for my parents having the life that they had, right? So them being able to come to this country, being able to start with nothing, and then growing their way up to having something and be able to provide a platform for me and my sister to be comfortable and live life however it is, right? And with that, whether it be good or bad, right or wrong, there's an expectation of, okay, you need to take advantage of the opportunity we gave you. And
Yeah, absolutely.
there's a sense of, well, again, right or wrong, I believe it. I agree with it. I understand it. There's a respect aspect to that. if we worked our entire lives to provide you guys a platform and a security and a place in this life to live an American life, take that as a responsibility, take that as a respect piece.
Yeah.
And if you don't do something with that, well, then that can be potentially disrespectful to everything we've tried to do for you. And for me, I think that that's part of the culture piece for me. It's like I grew up watching my parents go from, let's say, here to here to here. And so like seeing that, visualizing that, understanding what that looks like, it's just almost like, okay, I need to do this. I need to do the same thing. I see you guys working hard. I see you giving everything that to me that you can. Okay, well, I need to go do this. I need to do the same thing, process my own things, take advantage of these opportunities. And it kind of develops, I'll say, grit almost.
Yeah.
In terms of wanting to just go out into the world and become of something and do something with whatever it is, this opportunity that we were given or I was given to just be here.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's an appreciation aspect. There's the, thankful, right? Yeah. You're given this opportunity. You're seeing what that opportunity cost firsthand.
Yep.
It's a big cost.
I definitely did. My mom's first job, she was a housekeeper at a hotel.
Yeah.
And I would go with her and like, you see what she has to do for me to even get the chance to do this. Yeah, that puts a little energy in the tank. That gives you a little extra. But I'll throw one thing out there. I'm curious if you guys resonate with this as well. There's also a security piece that comes to it. When we moved from New York to Charlotte, my mom didn't have any place to go. Right, we didn't have really money to buy a house or anything like that. And we had family in Charlotte, and I had an uncle who I loved dearly, and he passed away a few years ago, who said, you guys come live with us. Like, we will make it happen. And this is my mom and 3 kids, right? Because my oldest, my sister was in New York. So that's 4 people coming into his house, and he's got his own, they've got their own kids and all of that. And he was like, come on, we'll make room. Like, there is a sense of that, sometimes when an entrepreneur is starting and they're like, what's the worst that can happen? Know, and it's like failure. And what happens if you fail? I'll be out on the street, or I'll be any. We've always had this sense of security that comes from knowing that no matter what, we've got a family that will have our back. Yeah. And it allows you to take risks that you might not otherwise take. And I don't take that for granted. Like, I really, really appreciate that sense of security. It's like, look, no matter what risk I took, I'm not going to be out on the street. I've got family that will help. They're not wealthy. It's not like they're not going to write, big checks or anything like that, but I'll have a place to sleep. I'll have, food to eat. I'll have clothes to wear, no matter what risk I take. And I think that sense of security allows you to go a lot farther, which is something that I really, really appreciate, and goes back to that value system of family.
I was just about to say, I think when you were talking about your story and your upbringing and, the situation about you guys just moved, got, married at the courthouse, those core values, and you just kind of pursued that. I think that in and of itself, when I think about, luck or blessings, like having a family that backs you is something that a lot of people take for granted. It's like, yes, it's calculated risk, but it's a risk with a sort of form of safety net underneath if everything hits the fan. And I think that's very prominent in like Latino culture, and at least from a Colombian background, my mom would do the same thing. My mom was a hairstylist. She, it's funny you talk about your dad in the living room and his studio working. I think back to my mom when I was a kid. She's a hairdresser, and she would have people over at night do their hair, and she'd always say, hey, go get her a piece of bread, go get her some crackers, go get her water, right? Yeah. Like, just your typical, like, everyone chips in type of mentality.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think seeing that in that entrepreneurial sense really, really hit home, especially as you're talking about your dad and your mom and the upbringing and having to sink or swim in that mentality. I think it goes a long way. I really think it does.
I would definitely resonate with that as well. And even Courtney herself would resonate with this. So we had Courtney on 3 episodes ago. She was our second episode that we had after us. Yeah. Great. And she mentioned something that we actually noted in one of our reels. She said that successful people take risks, right? And so that's part of the thing, is like, you need to take risks to take the next steps. You're not going to know if there's opportunity, if there's successes, if there's anything anywhere, if you're not taking that first step to try it. And that first step is really scary. And so, yeah, I think that's a massive point that maybe goes undervalued or underappreciated sometimes is the idea that, yeah, you're doing this stuff yourself, but there's other people doing it with you. Whether it's directly or indirectly, there's always going to be that support system and that family and those people that you have that are also on this journey with you. And I think that actually that's great. I think you taught me something in terms of just keeping that in terms of mindfulness. I think if you can be mindful of that, then that's also a motivational factor to keep going because you at yourself still love those people. They're part of your biggest values and core belief systems. And so if you understand that they're on this journey with you, well, that's motivating to succeed and not fail.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think, as we've built in that context, the backstory, and getting to, I think we left off at the healthcare marketing firm. Talk us through how that turned into Innovate Charlotte, and how the rest of the career has went, because I think there's still a lot. I think there's still a lot we have to touch on.
Yeah. The zigzagging continues.
Yeah.
So I started consulting, and to anyone who's done consulting, right, you always kind of go through a discovery phase. You start off by offering to help anyone with anything, and then you sort of whittle things down. I got partnered with the local innovation consultant and started to do design thinking workshops, for example. And really enjoyed that. Learned a whole lot about that side of innovation process and creativity. Started to do my own, really focused on marketing and brand building. A lot of what I did at that healthcare market research firm was sales communications. It's how you take that 10,000-foot brand story and relate it at the 3-foot sales conversation level. Really fascinating space, and I love that kind of work. And started to do some of those projects. And let's see, from there, I went to the very first accelerator demo day at RevTech Labs. And when I heard a lot of these companies giving their pitch, I said, wow, they've got amazing ideas and they have no idea how to pitch. Let me take some of what I've learned, right, through the sales communications background, and I did Toastmasters in college. So I was like, let's put all this together. And I started to do workshops on improving your pitch.
Wait, okay, question.
Yeah.
Before we continue, I am one who believes that failures are better than successes because failures are where you grow. Successes are not growth opportunities. So what is it that you were seeing in them that wasn't great in their pitch? Because I think that's where people will learn the most. It's like, well, not what a successful pitch, well, what's a bad one?
Yeah. So I think in those early stages, so this is a brand new accelerator program, and you can listen to an entrepreneur explain their business and understand what their business is all about because you're trying, like you're asking questions, you're sort of pulling threads out there, and then be like, oh, okay, I think I get it. Versus an effective pitch where it's very clear. I know exactly what you're doing, what value you're providing, where the opportunity is, what stage you're at. It's all about clarity. And this is communications 101, right? Yeah. There's a big communications consultant who has a saying that it's, if you confuse, you lose.
And that's good.
There are some very confusing pitches. And if you're not communicating it clearly, then just being in communications, I've always learned if the pitch is not understood, it's your fault, right? It's because you didn't communicate it clearly. And if you're an entrepreneur who has to pitch, the quicker you learn that, the better. Because there's also the entrepreneur who says, oh, if they don't understand it, it's their fault. Yes. The audience's fault. Yep. You just don't get it. That's a recipe for disaster.
And I think, we've talked about this before in previous episodes, but that's like a stoic principle, right? It comes back on you. Kind of, I when you're speaking through that, I had certain people in my mind where, they're explaining something and they would blame the other person. Like, why can't they get this? Why don't they understand this? What is it conceptually that's not clicking for them? And I think when you look back at it in terms of the growth that you were just talking about and the failures that growth stems, looking at, okay, what was I not clear on, right? Because every pitch is different. The crowd is different. Who, their backgrounds are different, and being able to cater a story, cater the mission, cater the vision in a way that they can align to is a skill in and of itself, right?
Yep.
Read the room, read who you're talking to, cater your story, cater the mission, cater the vision to that, while getting the point of the business across.
Yeah.
Right? Rather than just saying like, oh, it's their fault they don't get it. It's their loss. It's like, no, it's still your own loss. You
Right.
just did not articulate it in such a way that clicked for them. You know?
I would even argue and take it a step further. I'm sure you can maybe confirm or deny this for me, in which case I'll either learn something or confirm something for myself. The entrepreneur is the job, not the business. The entrepreneur is the job. That's your job. That's what you're doing. That takes a personality, that takes a character, that takes a mindset, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So I would take it a step further and say, well, that person that is going out there and saying it's them, it's you, it's this, it's that, well, you're not an entrepreneur because you're going to fail. The first thing you need to do every single time is self-reflect on yourself. What can I improve upon? What can I do better? Even if something is doing well, all right, well, what's not going well here? What can I pick something out of this that we can improve on? Because for me, right, my type of business is more like, okay, well, I'll release betas here and there to keep improving it. Well, that comes with things working well, right? So if you're at a place where things aren't working and you're still saying it's other people, well, what happens when things are working and then you're not going to create anything?
Right.
So I would say it's part of the whole entire embodiment of what you're doing. It's part of being that entrepreneur is being able to self-reflect and say, okay, there's something I'm clearly doing here. And you should always start with yourself rather than start outward.
Yeah. I would agree. I think, entrepreneurship, to do it effectively, there's a lot of skills and abilities that you need to have to be able to be a good entrepreneur. And it's not solely focused on that business. The ability to communicate, the ability to think of your product or your service in terms of your customer, the mindset to always be improving. There's a lot of that. And that's a big part of, like, even with Innovate Charlotte, we're always trying to connect entrepreneurs to resources to be able to improve these things. You need peer mentorship. You need to understand customer discovery, right? You need to improve your communication so that you're telling your story better to potential customers, investors, or prospects, or employees, or whatever. There's a certain core of that, but it's always about that self-improvement. And the best entrepreneurs that I know have that mindset, and they're wanting to make sure that their entrepreneurial thinking and abilities are honed, and that they are at their prime so that they can do the best they can for their company. I think that's the right mindset.
So then it would be intuitive why these entrepreneurs are not getting funding when they're going to pitch and they're thinking that it's other people's problems.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And they're not getting anything out of it and going to do the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite pieces of advice that I've received and that I've given to a lot of other founders is that the best founders fall in love with the problem that they're solving and not with their solution. So
that is great.
If you think of
wait, hold on. Say that again. Start with, say, founder key number 6, and then rehash that, and then go into the description.
So founder key number 6 is that the strongest founders are the ones who fall in love with the problem that they're solving and not with their solution.
Okay.
That is great.
Think back to founders, and I'm sure you guys have met them. There's some founders out there who they put a product out there, they put a service out there, they put some kind of solution out there, and it's not quite working, and they're like, the customer doesn't get it, right? I have this amazing thing, they just don't get it. They don't really pivot. It's always kind of the same thing. And a few years later, they're at the same stage, and it's always that. And the reason why is because they love their product. They love what they've built. And they think it's perfect. And it's just a matter of, well, the marketing's not right, or the audience is not right, or the timing is not right, because they think what they've built is amazing.
Yeah.
Now, you think of other founders, generally the more successful founders, and they go 100% on solving this problem. And they put something in front of the customer, and the customer doesn't respond the way they want them to. So they say, okay, let's listen to the customer. Let's try something else. And they're the ones who pivot, right? They're the ones who are really listening to what the market is telling them. And in a few years, their product might be completely different than what it was a few years ago. But it's because that's the best thing to solve their customer's problem. Investors look for this, right? They look for coachability. I teach a lot of the founders that I work with on my pitch workshops. And they always say, well, we pivoted here, we changed it here. Should I mention that in the pitch? I'm like, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because an investor, wants to hear that you tried this, you listened to the market, you took lessons, and now you've improved your offering in this way. That to me tells me you're coachable. you're listening to the market. If you skip over that, might come across as not being coachable.
Yeah, that is such a unique take on that, right? Receiving that feedback and putting it in the investor lens, because I know there's going to be some viewers that look at this, say, okay, they might be in the funding stage, right? So they hopefully can get some value out of that and say, okay, failures are to be highlighted, not necessarily to be tucked under the rug.
Yeah.
And I think that's something a really good call, especially how you say fall in love with the problem, not your solution. And I think if more people had that mentality,
Absolutely.
I think there would be a lot, I don't know if more successes, but less failures, So that's a very unique take. I like that one a lot. That one's going to stick with me for sure.
The way that I'm processing that, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, honestly.
The way that I'm processing that is almost intuitive. Yeah, focus on the problem because the customer's focused on the solution. Your client's focused on your solution.
Right.
Like you just said, there you go to the market, you take the feedback of the market tells you where your business should go, not you.
Yep.
The
Even though
market
this app or this solution that you thought was so amazing, if the market's telling you that's not what we want, then you need to pivot. You need to change. You need to listen to the market.
That's amazing.
And I think even on a deeper level, it's solutions change over time, right? Solutions become obsolete.
Yeah.
So if you still maintain that focus on the problem, then that coachability comes into play, that feedback reception comes into play, and you can still maintain a viable business. You can still maintain a viable brand just by being, versatile in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if Netflix, when they came out, their business model was mailing out DVDs.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what came to mind, actually. Yeah.
If they had just stayed on that, they wouldn't be the company they are today. They understand their customer, what they really, really want. And if it's time to change, then change your model.
Perfect example, Blockbuster.
Yeah, same thing. Yeah.
There's the two sides of the coin.
Yeah.
But anyways, let's start getting into Innovate Charlotte now here, because I think that there's a lot of value in terms of that, differently from what we've been speaking about.
Yep.
There's a lot of value in terms of the lessons we've taken from this conversation so far, but I think Innovate Charlotte is more of something of a platform and a support system, and that adds a different value for the people who would be listening. Given that right now we like to be relatively local with the people that we're talking to and the people we're interviewing. So yeah, would love for you to just talk about that a little bit and give the people kind of a rundown of why that would be beneficial, what it looks like, things like that.
Yeah. If I could just, I'll I'll fast forward to the Innovate Charlotte piece and just want to touch on one thing. It was just because I think it provides some context.
100%.
Going from consulting, starting to do some of these pitch workshops, connected with Vic Howie. So Vic Howie was a guest speaker at one of my classes at Johnson & Wales. That's how we met. He was the guy who designed the Whitewater Center. That was his idea to build out the Whitewater Center. And he reached out to me and said, hey, I just came back from this event in Baltimore, and it gave me this idea for an event where entrepreneurs got to pitch what they're working on kind of to the community. So we kicked that off. It was called Tech Breakfast at the time. And Jim Van Fleet was the MC. And about a year and a half later, we started to kind of reorganize it, investors as panelists, and rebranded it as Pitch Breakfast. Formalized it into a 501c3. I became the executive director, and that got me into the ecosystem building sort of world, right? Because now there's a nonprofit that is providing value to entrepreneurs by giving them a platform to practice their pitch to actual investors, get that feedback, bring the community together. And it was because of my involvement in Pitch Breakfast that a couple of years later, the city pulled together the entrepreneurial community, sort of different entrepreneurs, leaders, investors, and said, hey, how do we start to accelerate innovation in the community? Two things came out of that. One is a group of them got together and formed the Charlotte Regional Fund for Entrepreneurship, CRFE, which later became Innovate Charlotte. So it came out of that conversation. The second thing that happened was we were able to highlight some of the needs of the entrepreneurial ecosystem, which included more people need to know about the founder success stories that we have, so more storytelling, unifying a lot of the resources that are out there, so navigating the ecosystem, celebrating when there are wins, all of these things. And I came out of that meeting and said, I think I can do all of that. and so started my next company, which was Start Charlotte. Start Charlotte was a media company that did events and digital content around the startup community here. So I got some writers. In fact, my first writers were volunteers, and they started to just profile and interview and profile a different Charlotte-based startup every week. And we put out a newsletter, started to grow our audience, started to host events. We did Start Charlotte Live, did the first sort of startup awards, like Startup of the Year for Charlotte, which I think 2U Laundry got the first one. By doing that, started to build a community around the general startup scene. There were other organizations that had more specific focus. RevTech was really focusing on fintech, for example, and Jules was focusing on energy. Start Charlotte was about how do we support the entire innovation startup ecosystem. And so started to do that. Again, I'm still consulting first.
Yeah.
PitchBreakfast on the side, Start Charlotte as like another business. Started to grow the content and the community around that. And then a few years later, got approached by the business journals. So the business journals have a brand called Inno that they had in different markets. And they wanted to launch a Charlotte Inno, which is essentially, it was very similar at the time to what I was doing with Start Charlotte. So there was an acquisition of Start Charlotte, which was then rebranded as Charlotte Inno. So all of our content, all of our subscribers went from Start Charlotte to Charlotte Inno. And they brought me in to run Charlotte Inno as the general manager for Charlotte Inno. So at that time, I went from being a consultant first with startup stuff sort of on the side to being primarily involved in the entrepreneurial ecosystem and ecosystem building. And even it was actually before this that the CRFE group pulled me in to do some consulting as they were building out that CRFE model. So while I was there at Charlotte Inno, CRFE rebranded as Innovate Charlotte. So I wasn't a part of that at the time, but they rebranded as an organization that supported kind of the entire ecosystem. And I was doing something similar on the Charlotte Inno side. And then COVID hit. And then when COVID hit, events dried up, right? A big part of what we were doing was events. And so there wasn't a whole lot of ecosystem building happening. And the business journal sort of reorganized the way the Inno brands were handled. And I wasn't part of that new direction for that. So ended up getting booted from that role at Charlotte Inno at the same time as they opened up on the Innovate Charlotte side, which was a nonprofit, opened up the executive director role. And so that's how I got tapped for that. And then since then, we've really sort of, just to kind of get us up to the current, sort of moved Innovate Charlotte into more of that ecosystem building organization, still touching on some of what we were doing with Start Charlotte, which is about, navigating the ecosystem, celebrating successes, connecting entrepreneurs to resources, and really finding ways to grow the overall ecosystem. And that's a lot of the work that we do today.
So for anybody who wants to kind of get involved with this type of thing, what would you say to them? Like, what would that ideal person look like who wants to get involved? I'm sure there's people who are just curious, who want to learn. I'm sure a pitch breakfast could be very beneficial for them just to see what that looks like and just be in a room with people who are around that sort of community. I think it could also be very useful for people who are ready for their seed rounds to kind of go, like you said, pitch that out and get feedback. Is it for people who just want inspiration to get into entrepreneurship? Like what are those types of people that should be really looking at Inno and finding that value in it?
Yeah. So we'll start with Pitch Breakfast because, to be honest, we've been doing Pitch Breakfast for almost 13 years now, or 12 or 13 years. It really has become almost like the de facto entrance into the Charlotte startup community. Most people come into Charlotte and, say, hey, I've got a company, I'm interested in a startup, whatever, where do I go? Pitch Breakfast is every month and it's open to the community. You get to meet entrepreneurs, investors, you get to sort of hear what's going on. So we take that very seriously, and try to make it very welcoming, very inclusive, and always highlight what else is going on in the ecosystem. So people tend to sort of come out to a pitch breakfast, and if you're new to the community, you want to sort of see what's going on in the startup space. I invite you to come out to pitch breakfast. You can go to pitchbreakfast.com, and we always have the latest event there.
You guys just released the information on the newest one.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So we usually do about a month ahead, and it's usually on the second Wednesday. It's available. You can go in person, and there's free breakfast, or you can watch it virtually. If you want to catch the pitches if you're not able to make it out there. If you have a company that you're looking to practice your pitch, you go to the website. You can apply to pitch. We do look for companies that have some level of traction.
Okay.
Right. So Pitch Breakfast isn't really a platform for like an idea. There are other events and all of that where you can say, hey, I've got this idea. I want to get your feedback. But because we have actual experienced investors as the panelists, the highest value that they're able to provide was when they can engage with a founder talking about your existing business model.
Right.
Right. Not what not what you think it might be, but like what's the actual. That's what we found is the most value that it can provide. So that's why we focus on companies with traction for that.
Yeah,
Right.
that makes total sense. And I think, as hearing all your stories and your career path getting you to this point, even with as you said, you weren't part of the forward plans, but you still had all these other things going on. But at the same time, you were still always in the market, right? You're still always in that ecosystem. And one thing that I'd be curious to hear, because I know for sure, because we've talked about this, you've heard hundreds and hundreds of pitches and probably in the thousands at this point over the years. What do you find as a common factor between successful businesses, successful ideas, successful business models, and ones that don't, or maybe even the people that are pitching them? What are like kind of characteristics that you find in them?
Can I take a guess?
Go ahead.
It's the founder.
That's a big part of it. Now, that's what I was going to say there is when you said the people, there are founders that in that first conversation, you get the sense they're going to be successful.
Yeah.
And it might not be with this company, but they're going to be successful. And the opposite can be true, where you can meet a founder, you can say they might have some problems, or it's going to be harder than it needs to be. And it goes back to some of the things that we talked about earlier, right? Some of those innate, right? The passion, the focus on yourself, the self-improvement, the outlook, the attitude towards your customers, like all of those types of things, you can pick that up pretty early on in people. And we've got some amazing founders in Charlotte. I mean, we really do.
Mm-hmm.
And
We're learning that very quickly.
Yeah. So that's a big part of it. But there's other pieces of that too. You might have a really strong founder who is not the greatest presenter, and that's one where, like I said early on, when I first started to do workshops on pitching, that's why, right? Because I was like, wow, it's an amazing idea. It's a great opportunity. You understand your customer, but presenting is not your strong suit. Yeah. And if you are the type of company where the way to grow is through angel or venture capital, that's a full-time job. Right? For a founder to go out there and start taking the meetings and selling the company. Ask any founder who's done that. And it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot. And so companies need to be prepared for that. Founders need to be prepared for that.
Yeah. I mean, I would say along with that, it's also an opportunity if you understand something like that, have the self-reflection to consider bringing that second piece in, right? So I think a lot of people having a co-founder can always be a good thing for a lot of people who are starting companies, because that complementary piece of you're great at this, I'm great at this, can bring the full picture together into one whole.
Most investors that I know won't invest in a company with a sole founder.
Yeah.
For that very reason.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
A few of them will, and there are exceptions, but for the most part, generally speaking, if you don't have a co-founder, they're not going to invest.
Yeah. You need to be you got to be pretty locked in as one person.
That's interesting, because I also see the other side of that from like being a solo founder of why they may not want to bring on a co-founder. But I guess it does tie back, and now that I'm like thinking about it and talking to myself in a circle, like it ties back into the whole coachability or like being able to work with others or being able to take the feedback. So I guess that does kind of make sense in a self-fulfilling manner.
Yeah.
There's definitely a lot of aspects to it. Like I started with a co-founder. It was my sister's boyfriend, but he's still in college. Crazy impressive person. He's been involved in 21 startups and he's in his senior year of college. So I brought him in, and it was just a little overwhelming for him at the time because he had school. He was working financial analyst with Citibank at the time, full time at the same time, and then doing this stuff with me. So he kind of stopped with that, and I was like, all right, you need a mental health break.
Yeah.
Like, let's just break it off.
Yeah.
And like just picking those pieces up, it's definitely a lot more difficult to be able to compartmentalize everything yourself and divvy everything up. And, like think about the way that we work, right? Like we do very different things. We're very good at different things, and we don't necessarily always have to talk about what we're doing, but the pieces just start coming together because we're divvying up and we're using our personal skills to enhance the overall experience.
Yeah, I think it ties back to something, and this is on the investor side, like why an investor would have that, that I get into. After watching, I think we calculated about 800 pitches through PitchBreakfast, I started to notice a lot of commonality, right? What makes the strong ones strong? What makes the ones that aren't as strong not as strong? And I developed it into my own methodology that I call Pitch Start.
Okay.
And I use that methodology for workshops that I conduct with different accelerator programs and all of that. So in this methodology, we've really boiled down an investor's mindset into one line. And that line is the potential return worth the inherent risk? That's a one-line summary of an investor mindset. Is the potential return from this investment worth the inherent risk? So as a founder, you really have to maximize the returns and minimize the risks. When it comes to an investor talking to a founder who's a solo founder, there's risk.
And they bear all of it.
They bear all of the risk, right? So the having a co-founder, part of that is that de-risks a little bit from that solo founder. You're also sort of spreading out because usually there's one co-founder that's more on the product side and the other one that's more on the business sales side. But a big part of that is, that risk of having everything into one person is a lot higher than having two people sort of steering that ship. So that's going to be a piece of it.
Yeah, I could see that being a thing for sure.
Yeah, that's really, I like that a lot. As you talk through that makes more sense, honestly, especially from an investor standpoint, because I think, I'm in wealth management. I have my wealth management firm, and even with my clients, we talk about, diversifying. And it's the same thing from the foundership standpoint. You want to diversify the founders. It's different mentalities, it's different strengths, kind of like Keon alluded to us, like we're good at different things. And I think it all also boils down. I think this is where a lot of people get stuck, is like that trust.
Mm-hmm.
Like you need someone that you can just genuinely trust. And, kind of like we don't have to be like, hey, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? What are you doing here? We're like, you do this part. We said it once, great. I'll do this part. We said it once, great. And then it just comes together.
Yeah,
so I think
we set our system and let it rock.
Yeah. So I think if someone is thinking of finding a co-founder, that's something that they really need to keep front of mind, because there's legal risk in there. There's working risk. There's
personal risk
as well, especially when you involve family or involve friends. Like that's a whole different ballgame in and of itself.
It's like finding a partner for life. It's like getting married. It's a lot. But if you can find it, and you can find a co-founder that has that same vision and that really pairs well, right? Their skill set, what they bring to the table. That's what I've been seeing from founders that I've talked to that leads to success.
What do you see next? Well, actually, before I even ask this question, there's something that I want to jump back to from the start of the podcast. Is you had mentioned something special about Charlotte. What do you think it is? Because we've talked to a lot of people. We have a lot of friends, and when I'm telling my friends and family, "Oh, come to Charlotte, like check it out, you'll see it." Especially if you have a business and you want it to grow, this is a good spot to be in. We can see it in the Raleigh, the Tri area. We can see it here in Charlotte as well. There's a lot of innovation going on. What is it inherently you think about this area that kind of stems that?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. Part of it, and I'll speak just, I've been here for 27 years, 8 years, I forget. And just throughout it, right? The things that I've seen that have evolved. So one of it is It's a southern city with a lot of northern transplants. So culturally, there's something there. You've got
And
sort of-
Western. And
yeah,
Western.
and Western. I mean, yeah, it's a bit of a melting pot, and that brings different mindsets to work. So, and it's funny because people who are newly transplanted, sometimes there's challenges there. For example, you're a founder, you're taking a lot of investor meetings, and the investors aren't saying no right away, right? They're saying, "Oh, let's keep talking," or maybe, or not yet, and that delay. Whereas in other markets, it might be a quick nope. Done.
Yeah, we're done.
And so if you're new to that, sometimes that can be frustrating because you're like, I'd rather you tell no than sort of, keeping this going. And so part of that's sort of that Southern culture, but it's also mixed from people who are new to Charlotte and have a little different mindset, different connections. And so we've got a good mix of that Southern hospitality with Northern industry sort of, attitude in the business climate.
Killer mentality.
Yeah, a little bit. Charlotte also, there's always a conversation around the identity of who is Charlotte.
Yeah.
Is it a banking town or, what is it? And I think we always try to be bigger than we are.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's a great point.
And that's great, right? Because it's like everybody who is pitching in the business community always has their sights set on larger, bigger, better for Charlotte. And that helps. That means that they're willing to do deals. They're willing to be supportive. They're willing to pitch in. So all of that, I think, leads to a business climate that is more conducive to innovation, to new ideas, and to growing. Charlotte has a very welcoming ecosystem.
They do.
I mean, founders come here, and as long as they get plugged in, right, which is what we try to do with Innovate Charlotte and PitchBreakfast, is get you connected. And once you're connected, I mean, there's so many great people here that will absolutely take a meeting, make an introduction, offer advice, more so than even in other markets that I've visited or talked to people from. And all of that together makes for a very supportive environment that helps to, we were talking earlier about family, right? Yes. About how when you have that strong family, you can take these risks. Well, there's almost a little bit of that here. Like the community has your back. You feel like the community has your back. And that makes it a lot easier for you as a founder to take those risks.
Do you think there's also maybe a physical manifestation of Charlotte itself, right? So like Charlotte itself is growing, building new buildings every time you come and blink your eyes. Like there's new building popping up every single day. And the influx of that amazing statistic that you like to hear is like there's 100 people that move to Charlotte every single day. Crazy to think about. It's like, do you think there's a physical manifestation of just growth and development that just also just inherently inspires all of us subconsciously to just keep going?
It's exciting.
It is.
It's exciting. Right?
Exciting is the word that comes to mind. And like,
it's a good energy.
It's a great energy. And going off of that, like, I think geographically as well, being in the South, there's so many great schools around here. And Charlotte, for lack of a better term, may be one of the bigger cities in this area, right? Between this and I guess Raleigh. And, you have Chapel Hill, you have Clemson, you have USC, you have Winthrop, you have UNCC, you have all these people migrating towards this city. And I think that's a lot of fresh, young minds. I think this leads to a lot of what I've noticed, especially specifically in the last 4 years, 5 years probably, is the hunger. There's a lot of hungry people, and I think people look at this kind of as like the gold rush era of like there's a lot of energy to claim, there's a lot of space to claim, but I don't think it's kind of to your point, it's a very welcoming environment. It's not like, hey, you're stepping on my toes. It's like there's a lot of land for everyone. Let's help each other and let's grow something, which I think is something I've noticed more in the past 4 or 5 years. And obviously you've been here much longer, and I have a much shorter time horizon here in the area, but that's one of the key things I've noticed, that I think it makes it such a suitable hub for this type of stuff.
Yeah, I think, I've been in several business recruitment conversations where we're talking to, tech companies that are trying to come into Charlotte. And it comes up, the university, the higher education piece, well, the Triangle has all of these great universities. Yeah, but when you look statistically, when they graduate, they move
Where do
here.
they go? Yeah, exactly.
You know, they're moving here. So a lot of that talent's coming into Charlotte. And I mean, the corporate community knows this, and it's why we're becoming such a corporate innovation hub.
Mhm.
You know, you look at Duke building their innovation center over there at Optimist Hall. Lowe's just built their innovation
Yes.
center in South End. And you've got your Honeywell and Electrolux and Velux and the banks, you know, building innovation centers here. That's because they know that we've got all this amazing, innovative talent, young talent. And they want to tap into that at the corporate level. And of course, some of these people don't stay there and they come into the startup community, or they spin out and they start their own companies. So that's good for Charlotte as a whole.
Yeah.
Is that we have people with that hunger, with those ideas, you know, coming from some amazing schools, and they want to be here. They want to be where the action is.
Yeah, I think it's 60% of founders in Charlotte are under the age of 35, with the majority being under the age of 30, which is like a very, very big young movement of just innovation and drive and desire to just want to build something for yourself. But I mean, I think that goes hand in hand with society, right? I think we're coming into a place of society where, while corporate America has jumped and it's still going, and the idea of you have to go to college to get a good job and continue doing that is still very prevalent. I think we're starting to move into a space with the growth of social media and influencing, where people are more like, I want to go build a business. I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to do my own thing. And it's like, yeah, do you really?
Yeah.
Is it really that easy? Is that really what you want to do? Or are you just looking at this on the phone? You're like, this is great.
Right.
But I definitely think there's an influence of that to kind of push people to start, again, asking questions, whether they're the right ones or the wrong ones, but start asking questions of, okay, how can I get there? Can I get there? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think there's a big push, and I'd like to see an even bigger push to educate kids on entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial paths at an earlier age.
Yes.
And I'm a firm believer, I said at the beginning, I believe human nature is inherently entrepreneurial. It doesn't mean everybody needs to be an entrepreneur, because there are risks involved that not everybody can take. And there are, you know, skills and things that you need to be an effective entrepreneur that not everybody has or necessarily wants to build. However, if we were to teach all of our kids about entrepreneurship, how to be an entrepreneur, if they never start a company, they're still going to be more effective employees.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right? Because they now have the mindset of ownership, of looking at a multi, at a system with lots of moving parts, figuring out where their piece in that, and owning their project like a founder would. I mean, I think it was Gartner that did a study of CEOs of the skills that they want their employees to have. Almost every one of those skills described an entrepreneur. It's an entrepreneurial skills. CEOs want their employees to have entrepreneurial skills, right? They want intrapreneurs. And I think if we teach more entrepreneurial skills to kids, we're going to have a better society overall, just to teach the mindset and the skills that entrepreneurship offers.
100%. And if I may, you may not know the answer to this, but where would you start with that? Would it be thought provocation? Would it be provocation? Would it be critical thinking? Like where do you think you would start with something like that?
Yeah, so it's probably, and I'd have to go back to give you like a concrete answer. There probably are a handful of things that you would want to teach. I would say you want to start it earlier. So you've got entrepreneurship programs at universities. I think middle schoolers need to be exposed to entrepreneurship as a viable career option, right? And understand what that means.
Yeah.
I think through that teaching, critical thinking, customer discovery.
Yeah.
Right. Or problem solution, right? Instead of, do you want to be an architect? Do you want to be a doctor? Do you want to be this? It's what problems do you want to solve?
Yeah. That's part
a
of
great
the
question.
Yeah, exactly. I was just about to say that. Like, that's one of those questions that need to be asked. Like, asking the right questions. Right. The episode before this is Griffin Gervais, and he owns Come Home Come Home Collective is called, and he dives into the fundamental bring up through the education system and kind of turning it on its head in a sense through like emotional intelligence and understanding the kid in and of themselves, right? I think this ties very closely to that because of the fact is you're asking questions from a young age. It's not so much what do you want to do, it's like what value do you want to add to society? What problem do you want to solve? And I think if that question was asked a lot more, we would see a lot more entrepreneurship, foundership, and innovation as a whole from a very young age too.
I would say the question is just perfect because it'll just set you up for what you want to do. Well, what do you want to do? Right? Like, what are you passionate about? Well, if it's saving people's lives, well, then you're not going to go be a founder. You're going to go be a doctor.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I think that's just a great general question to just start putting people and kids into that mindset, because it allows them to then have a longer period of time of exploration and growth of who I am for what I want to do.
Absolutely. I think if you were able to design the education system around finding kids, exposing them to the different challenges and areas and all of that out there, and then sort of, navigate them to ask that question, what problems would you like to solve? Okay, great. These are organizations that are solving that problem. Let's go explore that. And it could be a nonprofit. It could be a career, a traditional career path. It could be entrepreneurship, and allow them to explore and ask the right questions. Develop that critical thinking. But it's really developing that big picture sort of view of that problem. Let me understand that problem. Let me understand what the current solutions are. Are they optimal? Could there be something better? And that's what drives entrepreneurship and innovation, frankly.
Yeah, you do have to be able to see things from macro and micro levels, and it's a good relationship. Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. This makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's yeah.
That's it. We solved
that's
education.
All right, let's call it a wrap. No, in the best interest of time here, I know we're coming up here on like an hour 25 here, but what is next for Innovate Charlotte? Tell us what's next for you and your life.
Yeah. So, a lot of what we've been doing is really talking to founders to identify where are the biggest areas of need. And we don't, and not just with founders, we also, talk to other support organizations and investors. And we've really sort of drilled this down to a few bits. Of course, capital is always an issue, right? And it's why we brought back the Seed the South Capital Summit. And it's something that we want to continue to develop and grow, because it's an opportunity to highlight Charlotte companies, right? Innovative companies to capital that exists throughout the region. So doing things like that. We've got some other initiatives in the work to really untap capital here in Charlotte. The connections of founders with each other. We host some events that are just for founders. It's what we call our Founders Network. And we're going to continue to build on that, because founders need the ability to sit down with another founder in a safe space and say, how are you dealing with this problem? Yes. I have to lay off my first employee. I don't know how to deal with this. How did you do that? And there's some of that value that comes from sharing with founders that helps to build, going back to our original discussion of like family, that trust that has to be there. And so we want to provide more opportunities for founders to connect with each other and share these experiences, and also share their contacts and resources. If you're trying to get into Y Combinator and you're sitting down at, we host an event for founders. And if you're sitting down next to them and you're like, oh, you came out of Y Combinator, like, tell me more about that. Like, you've got a much higher chance now of getting in or getting your questions answered. So trying to create those types of opportunities, getting involved in other initiatives that are happening at the city level to make sure that the startup community's voice is heard. So we're involved with the North Tryon Tech Hub. It's revitalizing the North Tryon Tech region of Uptown. And there's some other organizations that are trying to think of how to grow the economy and the ecosystem of Charlotte as a whole. And it's like, all right, we want to make sure that startups are heard here. And another big part, with my role in the city, is bringing an accelerator that focuses on Charlotte founders. And this is the Generator programs, G Alpha and G Beta, which we just launched a few months ago, and are going to continue to grow that specifically for Charlotte founders.
That's amazing. Yeah. That's amazing.
We ask the same question to every founder, kind of on brand with our Uncommonality podcast. So what is one uncommon practice, belief, or system that you think you can credit a lot of your success to, or that you think someone listening to this can get a lot of value out of, that they can implement in their life?
Yeah. So as we were having our conversation, there were different things. I was like, well, you could kind of touch on that, kind of sort of touch on this. But I think the very first thing that we sort of talked about of really, and I don't know if this is necessarily uncommon, but going back to your own fundamentals, your own values, is just so important. I kind of feel like it bears repeating.
Yeah.
We talked about education. We talked about entrepreneurship, risk taking, and one thing I didn't mention, but I have 4 kids. So they're ages 9 through 15 right now. And so much of what I do is I look at it through the lens of how this will help them. And so like my two oldest now, they come out to Pitch Breakfast events. I bring them to meetings.
I love that.
You know, I've had my oldest is interested in fashion. She's trying to explore sort of the fashion world. And she went to Pitch Breakfast when Ashlyn from Fashionably was pitching. She heard her pitch, and like they've now had several conversations with each other talking about the fashion industry, and she's learning, you know, different aspects of the industry. So everything that I do is through that lens of how will this impact like my kids? How does this help them and other people like them sort of grow, improve the city, all of that. So being able to have that one lens, and maybe that lens is different for different people, but having that one lens and viewing everything gets you excited, helps to bring focus to the work that you do. And I think leads to success. And that's success by many metrics, right? That's success by how fulfilled you feel in your life. That's success by what you leave behind. And ultimately that could be in success, you know, financial freedom, whatever, however you view that. So finding that one lens, I think is going to be it.
That's amazing.
That's awesome. And I love how you brought up Ashlyn, because Ashlyn's going to be on the podcast.
We're actually going to have
fantastic. Look
Ashlyn
at
come
that.
in.
Yeah.
She's amazing. What she's doing is really, really cool. With that marketplace that she's developing over there that's curated and stuff. Everybody needs that.
Yeah. I think
everybody needs that.
And she's a powerhouse too. I mean, her as a person, you want to talk about that it factor? She is a powerhouse.
Yeah, we'll see if Ashlyn listens to this beforehand, but we had this conversation where we were, because we don't do the startup of the year the way we were doing with Start Charlotte. But last year we had said if we were to do that again, I think Ashlyn would have been it. And this was before she went to Seed the South,
which she won.
She came to Seed the South. And we invited her to join our showcase. And out of the big pitch, which is the $100,000 investment, we had the audience select their favorite to do a wild card pitch. She won the audience favorite. And from that, she got into the big pitch, and she was one of the winners of the big pitch.
Wild.
And you know, we talked earlier about what makes us successful founders and the ones with the it factor. And I say it's the founder. It's such a big part of it, and you have to have the right timing, and all of that. She's definitely one of those founders.
She has it.
She has the it factor.
That it factor.
So when we do air that podcast, everybody tune in. Just pay attention to the mentality and words that come out of her mouth for sure.
Absolutely.
You heard it from Juan himself.
Yeah.
Father of entrepreneurship in Charlotte. No. So yeah, I think that is some great advice, and I think that's the greatest, one of the best commonality practices that we could put into place. And it makes the most sense in terms of its simplicity and just understanding the application of it. So while we wrap up here, just want to say thank you from me. Thank you from Sal, Juan, for coming on and spending this time with us and wanting to share your mentality, your ideas with our community that we have here. If you would like to, if you could plug any of your social medias, your Pitch Breakfast, your Charlotte, the websites, anything, please feel free to tell us what they are now. We'll plug them into the show.
Yeah, come on out to Pitch Breakfast, pitchbreakfast.com, or follow us on pretty much all the socials at Pitch Breakfast. And then Innovate Charlotte. If you want to find out about any events, resources, programs, anything going on in the Charlotte community, we have a bi-weekly newsletter. You can sign up at innovatecharlotte.org, innovatecharlotte.org, and follow us on social media. It's InnovateCLT on most of the socials. And and the last thing is, thanks for doing this. Thank you for having me on, but thanks for, providing a new channel to reach new folks and sharing these stories. I mean, this is how the city grows. And this is great work. So very much appreciated.
I would say we're definitely trying to supplement. We're trying to supplement a continuous growing community where I when I first met you, I loved what you were doing with the ecosystem, and I was like, okay, this makes a lot of sense. I love this. Yeah, we're gonna play our part as well and see what we can do, because like you love Charlotte, we love Charlotte. We believe in Charlotte. We believe in what it can do. We believe in the people here, and I think that all together, if we all put our heads together, we can do something major down here in the South. Yeah, personally,
100%. Couldn't have said it better myself. So, with that said, do you have fun?
It was a blast. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's it for us. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Peace out, guys.